Will history look kindly on Chris Christie? Does the broken window fallacy involve karma? And should we grow food over lawns? We look at these questions and more on this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. This is the show where we go through the internet and find the most interesting takes, and we talk about what they get right and what they get wrong. My name is Donald, and I'm here with my co-host Britt. And before we get started, just a reminder to follow us on socials at Good Take, Bad Take Pod on Instagram and Good Bad Take Pod on Twitter and YouTube. Without further ado, we'll get into the takes. The first one comes from Joshua Reed Eacle, a very strong proponent of the classical liberal caucus in the Libertarian Party. I don't know if I don't know if he is even anymore. Yeah, I don't know. Well, he's sort of in that I don't know. I don't like throwing around the word woke too much and inaccurate ways, but maybe just the blue-pilled part of the Libertarian wing. And he tweets, Governor Christie was the only candidate in the GOP primary actually running a campaign for president. Everyone else was running for second best to Trump. He was the only one willing to tell the truth to the party base, even if it was unpopular. History will remember him well. All right. You colored our opinion of Joshua Reed Eacle from the top of it. And to be fair, I think we've had a good take or two from him on our show before, usually about some foreign policy thing, but even as of late, he's not been good on that. But this is just absolutely terrible. Like, of all the Republican candidates to think of as like a pro-liberty, pro-libertarian, friendly to our general philosophy, not even like the philosophy of like the Mises Caucus or folks that are more, I guess they would say, are right libertarians or whatever, but like just the general libertarian philosophy. Chris Christie might be maybe only second to Nikki Haley in hostile towards that. And what's funny is like, what truths was he telling that were like took courage for him to say? Yeah, they were unpopular with the people, but aren't the people the ones he's supposed to be serving and speaking for? Like, that's what he's running for, is like, oh, I want to represent the people. Well, you're not speaking any of the truths that like the vast majority of democracy is decided upon. And not only are they not true, all the things he was saying, they're all based in lies, and they were based in just his these establishment opinions, but they were like unhelpful and like said nothing, which was always unfortunate. Like, I think what he'll be remembered for in history is his Donald Duck comment that he made it to debates. I think it was like the first debate. He's like, you're not going to be known as Donald Trump, you'll be known as Donald Duck, with the most awkward smile ever. So like, everyone always like praises his like debate prowess or something like that, because he had a great moment where he sunk Marco Rubio. I think it was in 2016. But like, I don't know, man. Like, other than that, he's not very good at it. He didn't represent himself very well on the stage. I thought in terms of like command of the facts, he did pretty poorly against Vivek Ramaswamy. And in terms of history remembering him well, I don't think history remembers him well today. So if that's Indy, like, and I'm not saying like him today, I'm saying like his tenure as governor, like he's known as like shutting down the bridge and sitting on a beach that he shut down so he could, be on it privately with his family and everything. So yeah, he does not represent liberty. He in terms of his tenure as New Jersey governor, has always been like one of the crony capitalists out there, using his government force in cooperation with business to enrich himself and his friends at the expense of the taxpayer and the people he supposedly serves. Yeah, I find this take might have some merit to it if it wasn't super disingenuous in a couple of ways. So the first is that if you're going to compliment Christie, the one thing you could say is he told unpopular ideas to a base, and that takes courage, right? Because regardless of what the specific facts of the matter are, telling a crowd of GOP people, broadly speaking, that Donald Trump was an insurrectionist or was as a traitor or is bad, that takes some level of guts to say that too, because he's very popular. In fact, that's the same thing that you would think would happen with Ron Paul when he told, a crowd in South Carolina about the idea of military blowback. Of course, he had a huge moment from that. And I think that that's the difference, is that Ron Paul actually told the truth, whereas Chris Christie said something that was very politically unpopular in this particular crowd, but is very politically popular, broadly speaking, right? So in some sense, yes, it takes courage to say something unpopular to a crowd you're facing. But on the other hand, you also have to recognize the broader context where it's like, okay, Christie gets
huge support for not within the GOP primary, but within the mainstream media, the respectable crowds for these kinds of views. So just instantly calling it, saying he was the only one willing to tell the truth to the party base, I roll my eyes at that, right? The other thing is that he's saying everyone else was running for second best to Trump, and he's the only one is having a campaign. You can argue that being in the sort of anti-Trump lane was putting you as really trying to be the only one to run against Trump. But I think that's super discrediting of even like Vivek's campaign, where even if you disagree with the strategy, the whole point that Vivek is making is that Trump will not be allowed to get to the ballot. He will not be allowed to return to power. Therefore, I'm running a real campaign in the vein of MAGA or whatever. So you can disagree and say that Vivek's wrong in these ideas or whatever, but he is running a real campaign, whether or not you think it's a good strategy or a successful one. It is a real campaign. It is a real tactic. And so this take to me is just one of those things where his personal distaste, perhaps, for some of the people is coloring what he views as objective facts. Whereas to me, it's like, okay, the things that Christie did that were good or brave was call things like he sees them without, being very politician-y in how he would answer things. Like Chris Christie was very good at answering questions directly. Regardless of whether I agree with them, he tended to do that well. I don't think it made him stand out. I don't think it gave him such a legacy that history will remember him well or anything. But I can acknowledge, yeah, he would tend to do a good job of saying, no, look, this is the question that was asked and this is my position on it. So that was good. I think his ideas, though, were terrible. I think every idea, everything he answered usually was wrong and bad. But I can at least say I think he answered those questions well. It seems to me like Josh Reed Equal can't even admit someone like Vivek is running a real campaign or is speaking truth in a hard-line way, because frankly, it also takes bravery to take a strong stand on some things. And that's why you see Nikki Haley saying one thing and then pivoting back to another. You see Ron DeSantis not really committing one way on Ukraine or not. Taking stances and being committed takes a level of skill and bravery that I think Christie has, and I commend him for doing that. I just think Christie was very disingenuous in the way he did it. I don't think he's telling the truth in a lot of ways, and I think he's doing it for broad popular media support. Whereas, like Vivek, I think he's taking a principled stance and at least is consistent in a lot of areas. I don't agree with him on everything, but he's doing that in the similar way where he's taking a hard stance, and he's going to get criticized from the broader media, from the broader, media, respectable people, politicians, etc. So, I think that probably I would recognize that Joshua's point has a little bit of merit in some ways, but just the fact that he can't see beyond his own perspective, to me, I think limits this take from being anything valuable and just is kind of lousy. Well,
yeah, like I understand what you're saying about Ron Paul saying the unpopular truths to people in South Carolina and all around the country, in the heels of 9/11 and 2,000 dead Americans. Like the things he was saying were very, very unpopular. But I think a huge difference between him and Christie, let's even say if Christie somehow was able to get the truth correct. Like Christie doesn't do this from a place of like, oh, I actually care about people and I care about the truth. He cares about his own power. And not only that, I think he actually has a level of disdain for the people that he's saying these things to. And so he doesn't really care if the people that because he talked about, the maggots and the mega Republicans and all these people. And it's like, yeah, you're speaking truth to them, but not in a way that you're wanting to try and persuade them. And again, not saying that what Chris was saying was truth, but in a way that's like, oh, well, I don't like them. And I think that history is going to look on them. And I think it's cool for me to be against these people because they're the basket of deplorables, as Hillary Clinton would say. And you can see this throughout all of Christie's career, right? So he's at the beginning of the Republican debates in 2015 and 2016, obviously very much against Trump. And then once he feels the wind blow a little bit differently, he's suddenly with Trump, so he can be part of it. And then the second, stuff starts to falter and some public and popular opinion, and maybe the wind is blowing a different way, Christie totally reverses course. And I think that was one of the most beautiful parts about Vivek being on the stage was that, basically everyone except for DeSantis, he was able to really nail with hey, you guys were on Trump's team, making all the same decisions and cheering him on. And now you're Monday morning quarterbacking him, even though you were there playing the game with him at the same time. And I think that just illustrates, and I'm hoping that history remembers this illustration of Christie's, all he cared about was power and amassing more of it and trying to do what he thought would be the best for him and his pocketbook and his own potential ego.
Yeah, I was gonna say, when I think about Chris Christie, his legacy as governor, I think about not only what he maybe wants to shy away from that people remember, but I also think about what he brags about. And I saw him speak, unfortunately, in person one time. I think it was around 2018. And he bragged to the audience about the time when he took public emergency funds and put them into education because he saw the education crisis as a public emergency. And he said, well, you look at that, and that was, the state of the education system was an emergency. And he was like bragging about that. And I'm like, okay, so basically what you're really, really happy about is this idea that you get to misallocate funds and then dump it into public school. So you take one thing that's not meant for, you basically pull I'm going to make the most broad interpretation and work my way around the written law and in the most generous, simplistic interpretation type scheme. And then I'm going to throw it into the most corrupt system of the public education system and then brag about it. Like, if that's what you're bragging on your accomplishments, sir, I don't think history is going to remember that guy.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to the next take. This one is a sort of a Quora description of the broken window fallacy. So the question is, how do you explain the broken window fallacy? And it reads, though it literally means loss to you, parentheses, when a window is broken, is a gain to someone else, you get parentheses, you give a job to a carpenter who repairs it and gains his livelihood. He purchased repairing item from another person who also gains his livelihood, who in turn purchased the same from another person, goes endlessly benefiting many people, end paragraph. Parentheses. It has helped me to remain balanced always. I remember this principle even when I am overcharged or cheated by someone. In such unpleasant situations, my thinking goes like this. Money overpaid is a loss to me, but it is a gain to another person. Maybe he badly needs this money because of situations such as poverty, debt, or never-ending medical expense of one of his family members, which means I helped him in principle, or I owed him this money in some unknown ways in some distant past, maybe in some previous birth. In other words, my loss is really a gain, which it settled some karmic account of which I was not aware of, but which nature was aware of. Oh my goodness. That took me on all kinds of a trip I was not expecting.
It was a really funny one. So it's a bad take from a person who I think is trying to live a fairly good life or like look at things in a positive way. So what I would say is that like this mindset of like trying to have a positive outlook when bad things come about, that's a good thing. Broken window fallacy is a very discredited economic mode of thought, which is that, hey, when things get destroyed, it's actually a good thing because that means that economic activity occurs. This person's trying to like reframe it, be thankful even when bad things happen. I more or less agree with that. Like always having a good mindset and having a heart of gratitude is a good thing. Some of the karma stuff I don't necessarily agree with though. But I think this is representative of maybe the overall mindset of people economically when it comes to like protests or destructive economic policies that like make you feel good because you're quote unquote helping someone, but you're actually not. And what in an economy, you either have more of something or you have less. And so this person would try and say that like, oh yeah, when the window's broken, then the carpenter gets helped because he's got to build some wood framing, and then the glass makers help, and it goes on and so forth. But really, the only way that you ever amass wealth is by having a net amount of things actually occur and be produced in it. And when a window is broken, that means that you actually have to produce more just to maintain what you already had. So no one is actually getting any more wealthy. You're actually getting closer to poverty, as this person talks about. This person needed money because of situations such as poverty. Well, a lot of poverty only comes about because things are destroyed, whether it's destroyed through someone actually throwing a rock through the window, or maybe someone made a really bad business decision that resulted in losses, or maybe some criminal did something. The reason poverty exists, it's the default state of nature, but because we exist and we create things, we automatically are above that floor. The only way to get closer to poverty is for things to be destroyed. And that's why the broken window fallacy is so bad. And that's why when someone says hey, this socialist policy or this redistribution of wealth, well, yeah, it's going to be taking things away from someone and give it to someone else, but we need to help that person. It's for the greater good. It's actually not for the greater good. It's at the expense of the greater good because you're not actually helping anything be produced. You're making the total amount of wealth in the world less.
Yeah, I was gonna say I agree with your whole premise starting out. Like, it's good to think in those ways or whatever, but it seems like this whole description doesn't understand the idea about it being a fallacy, right? There's no point at which this description actually shows that it's a fallacy. It talks about how, actually, the fallacy is all the benefits, and then it never describes how that's not a thing, right? It says, it's a gain to someone else, blah 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 blah, and then they never explain this is not the case, right? So just in case anyone's not aware, like, that's what Brit's explanation is for, right? Because when you break a window, that doesn't help the economy, that takes away, that detracts. It's potential loss for someone else. And if you want just a really simple way of thinking about it, if breaking a window created jobs in an economy, then you in your personal home should also be willing to break your own things, right? You should be willing to, at least in theory, understand that as a household, it is better for you to build something like an addition to your home, or if you don't own your place, like building a piece of furniture and then breaking it down, and then understanding that because you have now created more activity and more work, that should somehow create wealth, which obviously you would understand doesn't work. But the only difference in that equation is you're saying, well, no one's paying me for it. And the answer there is correct, right? No one actually gets paid for the window to be broken. All you do is you have to pay to clean up the mess. And so in the same way that you think, like, well, I just spent all this time building this piece of furniture or building this house addition, why would I break it? You have to think, you're actually gonna, in order to rebuild that, the cost to you is time, not money, because you yourself might be rebuilding it, or it is your own money. But as you can see, you didn't create any money for that thing to get broken, even if your money is now going out the window to someone else, right? If you break your house addition and then you need a contractor to come repair it, you pay that contractor. The money you're paying that contractor didn't get generated from you breaking it. That had to be taken out of things that were already made, already created, effort that was already put in. So where this fallacy occurs is the idea that just because money is being spent means it helps the economy. That isn't the case, because the money being spent is money that would have been used in other ways. It would have been value, it would have been resources that would have otherwise gone elsewhere. So that's kind of the fallacy that, for whatever reason, is left out of the picture here.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, but, like, if this happens to you, I guess, be a good sport about it.
Yeah, but I guess you're right that, yes, be a good sport, or be I'm not going to get depressed and give up because some bad economic thing happened to me, whether it was my doing or someone else's, and I got to keep going. But I think even that is like an acknowledgement that in order for your life to continue, you have to actually continue to produce something, right? Like, I got to keep myself in a mindset that can actually produce something, because that's the only way that things get better. And it's really a bummer, because a lot of people who are lefty, and people that you and I knew in college, and like, definitely, like, have a bleeding heart that is truly there, that really does care about the down and out. And then somehow, though, they get convinced that, the way to do this is kind of this, like, let's just give them this, or take this from this person and give it there. But it's like, that doesn't actually make anything better, right? And I think one of the ways that, some like capitalists and people of free market persuasion have erred is being a little bit too harsh on that side of it, and just being like, hey, no, like, you and I both do want people to be better off, but there's a right way and there's a wrong way for that to happen. There's an effective and an ineffective way for that to happen. And it just so happens that the right principled matter of liberty, freedom, and, free exchange also make it so that people can get in a better position. And the fact of the matter is that some people don't want to be in a better position, or they make choices that actively destroy their ability to do that. And nothing you do, regardless of how you redistribute the wealth or what sort of social programs you put in place or anything, is ever going to fix that. The only way for that person to get better is for them to actually produce something. And so us putting the proper incentives in place, and not even us putting them in place, just letting the market have the incentives in place, is the way for that to occur.
Well said. Okay, our next take comes from Twitter. and it is someone who tweets, if children started school at 6 months old and their teachers gave them walking lessons, within a single generation, people would come to believe that humans couldn't learn to walk without going to school.
Yeah, this is good. I'm a homeschool person. I think it's an interesting like perspective to have this, because it's like I'm not a fan of Ronald Reagan, but his quote of like, I think it was Ronald Reagan. I can't remember who said it, but there's nothing so permanent as a temporary government program.
Yeah.
And that's very much how like these public school systems are set up. And that like, oh, well, who's going to, teach math, or like, where are kids going to go? It's like, well, for most of human history, we didn't have things like that, or school was done in a very, because like people required kids to go work on the farm or do whatever. And people still were able to learn and do things. And so we have this, this unfortunate thought that the only way for someone to be educated is to go spend 8 hours in a classroom being told what to do, how to think, and then going home and doing another couple hours of homework. That's obviously that's like more than a full-time job, and that's not how all of history has worked. And I remember seeing a statistic, and I can't remember the exact percentages, but I remember it's like a pretty high order of magnitude that the number of questions a child asks from like age, once they're able to talk, like at 1.5 to till about 6 or 7 years old, it literally has like a 4x reduction by the time they start going to public school. But that reduction does not occur if they don't go to public school and they're like homeschooled, or they do some form of alternative education. And so people think that, okay, well, if we don't send our kids there or anything, they're not going to be inquisitive, they're not going to be educated, they're not going to learn how to read or do any of that stuff. And yes, there are some, unschooled people or and things like that. But the vast majority of people that are not doing public school are still learning. They're just doing it in a much more effective manner.
Yeah. I am always shocked at the ability that people have to learn things apart from formal systems. I'm like, when you give people the resources and the ability to pick up and learn things, people do it. And I think the great fallacy of this age is that schools do that very thing. And it's like, no, kids can figure things out without them being sort of indoctrinated. Like you provide the ability, the questions, and you let people put the pieces together themselves. So to me, it's like the best case of education is providing these resources and then teaching people how to find the answers themselves. But our public education system does not do that. And the problem is, you can tell this just in the base idea, just in the base way that people think about how schools teach. The fact that people think even this general idea that, without public education, kids aren't going to learn how to do X, Y, or Z. That's the problem, because people think this idea that, oh, a school's job is to give a child all of the answers they need to know on how to do everything, and they need to walk them through and not let them figure it out. And that's a huge problem as to the way that we teach schooling and the way that we perceive schooling to be a thing. And so I think this take is accurate, because a lot of people currently believe, without public education, how will kids ever figure out X, Y, or Z? And the answer is, in most cases, quite well without it. Whether it's through other educational opportunities they get in the real world or through other systems that are set up to help kids excel, the public education system is more of a crutch than anything else. And I think that that's true when you look at studies that in general talk about that sort of thing that you were talking about, with where, the questions they ask and it all sort of dies. I can't remember if it's the same one or a different study that said something along the lines of every child measured, or a certain percentage of children measured before they enter the public school system are on track to be geniuses, basically, based on their level of brain activity and their comprehension and stuff. And then that drastically falls off the moment they start getting taught to conform and to not be original and creative through the public education system. So it's not only a matter of how they teach, but also just the way in which we teach everyone to be the same. It's kind of a and B there, in my opinion.
Yeah. One of the things that, like, because it's hard for people to conceptualize, and I this doesn't mean these are like hard sciences or hard skill sets or anything like that, but like something like reading or math or things that like maybe you don't know as a parent or something like that as well. Maybe you don't know calculus. It's like, well, how would my kid ever learn how to do that? And like I was thinking about how in my education, my mother tried to teach us to read as early as possible because she figured, hey, if I can get them to read, then I can just put a book in their hands and they're going to learn and absorb whatever information that comes out of that book. And more or less, like I'd be like, okay, like not all parents are going to have the patience to sit with their kids and teach them to read. And so, yeah, maybe having some third party come in to do that would be a good thing. But even on that metric, the most basic, most important thing that a public school is supposed to do, that you could ever teach a human being how to read, like they fail miserably at it. Like according to their own standards, I think it's like 40 or 50% of middle schoolers don't even hit the basic level of proficiency for reading skills. Like that's like really, really bad. Like I know it's not majority or something like that, but that's like 1 in 3 are not, more than 1 in 3 are not able to properly read. And that's really troubling. And so even the things that you'd be like, oh my gosh, like I need to have another third party teach this because it's so important. Like they fail miserably at it. They do such a terrible job. So even if like in this guy's scenario, like, oh, I would highly doubt that humans would, if they were put in school to learn to walk or whatever, it would actually be a net negative in a lot of ways. Like I think we'd have kids not learning how to walk until they're like 2 years old because the public school system does such a bad job at teaching that it actually hurts and hinders development.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. All right, this post is an image of a poster that reads, "If we each grow a large crop of different food, we could all trade with each other and eat for practically free." And then a little mini heart that says food is free. Grow food, not lawns. Wow. Okay. What do you make of this one?
Well, it's a good take in that, like, if a first grader wrote this, I'd be like, hey, nice job. Like that, this is the beginning of understanding, how free exchange and specialization works. But I'm pretty sure an adult wrote this, and I'm pretty sure this was from the Chaz/Chop autonomous zone that was set up here in Seattle. I had it stored on my phone from a long time ago. Yes, like this is true. This is also what capitalism is, which is everyone with different skill sets producing something and then learning how to trade with each other. And oh, hey, like what if someone doesn't want to grow food? Maybe they're like really good at repairing things, or maybe they're good at fixing the farm implement that you use to create carrots and things like that. Like maybe there's not a good ratio of service to a number of carrots, so maybe we should agree on some common coin or piece of paper or object that that we can now exchange, that we all agree has the same type of ratio to each type of item. It's like, okay, now you've got money, right? And so what's funny is that this person who was in the autonomous zone and self-described socialist has, just by thinking a little bit about how the world could work, has arrived at a somewhat capitalistic free market solution, as most people that think about things practically do.
Yeah, and it's funny because the worst part of the take is the part that's divorced from reality, which is food is free.
Yes.
The idea now the contention of grow food, not lawns. You could make that argument. You could say, yeah, because lawns also do cost something.
Yes.
But it's not that food is free. It's that food as an exchange doesn't need monetary. You don't need money to exchange food between people. That is true. But we also have to recognize that we've come far in a society where different dietary habits and choices that people make, as well as needs they have, can now be adapted in ways that they never could before in history.
Yes.
And this is the thing that's really funny about people who tend to be very leftist and then reductionist in their economics, is because when it comes to social policy, quote unquote, they're very, very wide net. They're saying we need to include everybody. We need to have, we need everything to be all things for all people. Every program needs to have every opportunity available to every kind of person, whether that's dietary options for everything or other. But then they talk about this kind of thing where it's, if we all grew a large crop of different food, we could all trade with each other and it'd be great. And it's like, okay, great. Now you've completely excluded people with different dietary habits, people who need higher amounts of protein than just growing crops would provide, people who are used to a different cuisine from their own cultural homescape that doesn't grow in this place. You've now excluded other cultures. It's And so it's funny because this take not only neglects the basic economic sense of that food isn't free, you have to get the seeds from somewhere, you have to put in work, those are all economic costs, but also you've created a super exclusionary reality, even though this is supposed to be the inclusive, everyone's welcome area. It's like, well, now you're actually drastically limiting the choices that free market exchange allows you to engage with. The fact that we have fruits and varieties of crops and meats and things available to us year wide is insane. And that's because of free exchange, because of technological development and trade that allows things that don't grow locally to be traded across the ways. And generally speaking, in order to do that, you need developments and technologies that don't just involve crops. And that's why you have some sort of currency or token of exchange, because you need to develop these kinds of technologies beyond just food to food exchange.
Exactly. And their little blurb at the end, grow food, not lawns. It's like, I don't think this person would want to live in a world where, because they're already kind of on to the prospect of free markets and signals and market exchange. A world where the lawn that you have in the United States, in Seattle, Washington, where food is so scarce that you have to resort to. It's more beneficial to you to have to grow food on your lawn than it is to actually have a lawn. Like, this person doesn't want to live in that world. Like, it's such an amazing world. Like you're saying, that I can get an avocado at any of the 12 months of the year. Like avocados don't even really grow up here in Washington State. And even if they did, they would only grow in a portion of the year, and I'd only have access to them at that portion of the year. What's amazing about the way the economics and our technology and how specialization has worked is now I can get that, and I can get strawberries, and I can get sweet potatoes, and I can get all sorts of things at all times during the year, and I don't have to worry about that. And the world where people's signal for the market is like, oh, I got to use this space of my property to grow food, that means things are really, really bad. That means there's been a breakdown. And in order for this system to work where everyone's growing things for practically free, it's like everything actually will become more expensive in terms of the amount of effort and time and personal resources it takes. They will not have time to create art and do all these different types of things that they think they will do because none of them have ever farmed before at a scale that can feed an actual individual person. If they ever want to go figure that out, like I guess this isn't farming, but like I went out and did cattle branding one day. Like I had a coworker inviting me out to the countryside, and this is like it's a beef place, and they've got a bunch of cows, and it's like spent all day, just branding a bunch of cows, and it was so much work. In the morning, we started at 4 a.m. We were unloading hay to feed them, and all these different types of things. And it's like, yeah, that's a lot of work just to get a beef patty, right? And to think about if you wanted to actually feed, a group of, if one person was going to specialize in it just to grow cows and have burgers, which this person probably is a vegan, but regardless, it's like for a city of 1,000 people, like that's a ton of work. Like you're working from dawn until dusk. There's not a lot of free time. It's really hard on your body. But with the specialization that we have, it now means that like some people are able to leverage a lot of technology to work fairly normal days, or at least work a season, and then that amount of food that they've got is able to cascade out to the rest of the world. So that farm is able to supply beef to the rest of Washington State instead of just to 1,000 people working dawn till dusk. So yeah, this world that this person is advocating for is the Stone Age of economics, and they would not want to live there because it would be very bad.
Right. For every good idealistic view you have of the past, you also have to take everything that comes with it, right? You can't just pick and choose.
Yeah.
You can't just say, wow, I wish we were back to an agrarian society where people grew their own crops and stayed at home, but also I want all of the things that allow me to say things like everyone's dietary preference should be recognized, or everyone should have running water, everyone should have, sewage disposal system. Like there's a lot of trade-offs that come with going to a prior age. And in that, I think it's G.K. Chesterton, his quote about if you walk in a field and you come upon a fence, ask why it was built before you just tear it down.
Yes.
That's kind of the system with money. Now, there's good questions. That doesn't mean you don't tear it down. That doesn't mean you can't re-examine institutions that exist, but it does mean maybe put a little bit more thought than just saying food is free.
Yep.
Okay, our next take comes from Americans for Tax Fairness. And this one reads, breaking: billionaires and centimillionaires held $8.5 trillion in untaxed, unrealized capital gains in 2022. Unrealized gains are the largest source of income for the ultra rich, but they're completely untaxed under our tax code. This is why we need a billionaire income tax. All right.
Yeah. This
Take
is
it away.
this is a terrible take. There are a lot of reasons for it. I think one of the most common things that people were commenting on this was that, like, oh, well, unrealized gains are not income. And it's like, that's not exactly true. Like, if you worked at a grocery store and in a true free market, you worked at a grocery store and maybe you owed $100 to the grocery store, and they said, hey, we're gonna forgive that debt. Like, even though you didn't you didn't have any like dollars come in, that was still technically income in a lot of ways. And like Mises defines income as the amount of consumption that can occur during a time period without reducing the market value of the capital. And so technically it's not, it is income. And so when people are saying like, oh, well, unrealized taxable gain, are not income, they're not exactly right. But the principle that they're taking issue with is correct, which is that, like, taxing unrealized capital gains would actually severely destroy. Like, you're not actually taxing $8.5 trillion. Like, you're more likely devaluing that to maybe half or a third or a quarter or some percentage of it, because in order to get that, you have to sell that off, which would create, make that that asset that they're holding, or those gains that they've held in stocks, which is what most of these are, a lot less valuable. And so they would actually be destroying tons of wealth. And as we talked about earlier, like, you don't make society better by destroying wealth. You make it quite a bit worse. And the only way for things to get better is for people to not only gain more, but then to also reinvest that into other things. And so when you do tax unrealized gains, like, you're destroying the ability for people to invest in new technologies and new processes and new businesses, and in people, to create a better world.
Yeah, this is the exact kind of thing that is destructive. One of the things that generally conservatives will mention, and they are correct to mention, things like, man, when we have higher taxes, you're just discouraging people from earning more. Like, when you have a graduated income tax, or a graduated tax, the more you make, the less you, or the more you're taxed. And that's exactly what this kind of thing would do. Is it would discourage, in the same way, making more money, even if it is at a right, proportional rate. It specifically will also discourage the kinds of behavior that happens with unrealized capital gains, namely saving. And you can argue, oh, it's only the ultra wealthy or the ultra rich, but even when ultra wealthy or ultra rich people save, that's actually beneficial in the long run, because you want an economy of people who aren't overspending what doesn't exist and aren't spending what have. You want to have reserves and things saved, so that when other people need access to resources, then they have a place where they can borrow from. And that's not necessarily always going to be directly the unrealized capital gains, but unrealized capital gains allows people to then sell their capital gains, get that realized gain, have money that they can lend out, things like that, right? Generally speaking, you just want an economy of stored reserves. Whether or not it's in the hands of the wealthy or not, it is better to have an economy where there is some subset of savings. Again, regardless of where that is, because savings represents the idea that you have things that you are saving for when times are tough, or when you need times to innovate. It's also very frustrating because this is clearly the take here has this assumption that this is why we need a billionaire income tax. But they don't actually provide a reason why we need a billionaire income tax. They say they're untaxed, and that's why we need a billionaire income tax. Yeah. Like, what? Like, because people aren't being robbed of their money, that's why we need to have a mechanism to rob them of their money. That there's no argument there, and it's really distressing that we're at a place where the idea of taxes are just so normalized, even amongst conservatives, that it's like, well, of course taxes have to exist. Of course taxes have to. If something's not taxed, well, we should really consider we need to have taxes for this. If there's a lot of money and the government's not getting its hands involved, we got to talk here. Like, what? When did that become the justification?
Well, it's like we've talked about in previous episodes. Like, there's an instinct and a notion that things are not good, that they are bad and unfair, and that there's a select few amount of people that are responsible for it. And unfortunately, these people, the way they see it is they say, well, someone's got a pile of money, things are bad, it must be because they're not paying into this entire, fair share of community funds that were supposed to all be owed. It's like, yeah, you realize, like, even if you taxed 100% of the value of that 8.5 trillion, I mean, that's like whatever. I mean, it's 30% of the national debt, right? Like, it doesn't even get us to zero in terms of like what we all owe. Like, your share of the debt that you owe, it doesn't even cover a third of it. And so, I think even if you took all of the companies, out there and you just stripped them of their value, like took everything away from them, like you can barely fund the government for any meaningful stretch of time. And it's because it's not efficient. It doesn't actually spend your money on the people that matters. And like, yeah, there is a pile of money out there and it is causing you issues, but it's not because a bunch of people have it. It's because that they printed a bunch of money and they piled it all up and they devalue the money that you have. And everyone always, like, growing up, like, I always was told, like, hey, be a saver. That's like just a principle. Like, I had like a piggy bank, and I would, like, whenever I earned money, I'd put it in there, and it was like awesome. It was translucent, so I could see the money stack up in it, which was really, really fun. And like, that was just a principle. And like, that is a really good principle in general to have, like, hey, I'm not going to spend more than what I've already got in my bank account. There are times, as we've alluded to, that like it is good to borrow from the future, or maybe not even borrow from the future. It's good to borrow from other people that have saved money so that you can do something that you might not be able to do today, but that's going to create a better future for everyone, or is going to get you further. It's going to get a return on the investment. But the only way for that to occur is for the pile of money that's been saved to not be destroyed. And that's what this is doing. Like, this money, and yes, so a lot of the people that hold this money are awful people. They're not good people. Maybe they're even greedy and all these different sorts of things, but they still have the right incentives in place to generate good things to happen. Like that new, medical startup, or that new technology startup, or that new, farm or service that you want to have happen in your community, or you wish to exist that can make the world better. The only way for the people that have those ideas but that don't have the money to make it happen, for them to actually make those things occur, is for them to go borrow money or to have investment from someone that does have money that has generated in the past. All you're doing when you tax this pile of money is making it harder for those people to make those things happen for everyone else.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's just this weird misconception that if money isn't actively being used, then it is doing a bad thing. And I just think about all of the situations in which, just if you think about dollars as an actual asset, like translate dollars in your mind to like sandwiches or food reserves, and then think about, there are a lot of ways in which money or food could be getting distributed and helping and stuff. But also, when like a flood comes in and you have a bunch of people, you want to have that reserve of food ready to access on a whim. And so I don't know, like, they're just, even in principle, the idea of having savings is a good thing for an individual, and it's a good thing for an economy and a community. And so, even if you're in a voluntary community without taxation, there's probably, an organization of some sort that aggregates people's excess in times of despair. It's like, if we weren't under a local tax system, but our neighborhood said, hey, look, we're gathering a little bit of extra, whatever you can spare, to contribute in case, like, the weather brings down all of our power grid, and we want to be able to have that up and running soon. Will you contribute? It's in my self-interest to do that. And when that happens, all of that money goes to this organization, and it sits and it waits. And that's a good thing, because then it can be responsive to when there's an active need for it. Yes. So the concept of saving is good for an individual, like you were, saying, being taught to be a saver is good, and it helps out in so many ways, just for an individual level, but it's also good as a mutual community level, whether that's, again, in the hands of a government or the hands of an individual. And you and I don't think governments use them in good ways, but even in sort of the best case scenario of a government, the idea of a government should be that there should be a lot of excess savings. They shouldn't be borrowing against the future at a higher rate and, basically paying for things out of your children's money. There should be savings in a government if you're going to have one. There should be savings for these responses that they need for these beneficial programs or whatever, if you're going to argue that that's what governments do. All of that should be coming from savings that can be responsive and used at an appropriate time. Otherwise, you end up destroying more resources and kicking the can down the road and hurting people in the future, rather than working hard and not living beyond your means today. All right, well, I think that's it for us for this episode. So thank you so much for listening in. And if you enjoyed this, make sure to share it with a friend. We always appreciate it. And we'll catch you on the next one.